Nick Harris interview. George Winston, Eric Hardy. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so we're here today to interview Mr. Nick Harris. He was involved in Dutch Morial's first administration. And we'd like to talk to him about the era and what was going on in the city. So first off, how did you meet Ernest Morial?
How did I meet Dutch Morial? I was living in Washington, D.C. That's my phone. Okay. I was living in Washington, D.C. and decided that I wanted to move to New Orleans. And I got in contact with Congressman Bob Livingston, whom I had worked for a very short period of time. And he sent a letter to Dutch Morial about me. I sent my resume, and I moved to New Orleans and began working in his administration.
What year was?
That was in 1981. Okay? 1980, yeah, 81.
Now you immediately went to work for the minority business?
No, actually I started off with UDAC's Urban Development Action Grants, and as the UDAC administrator. And UDAC's really was the primary economic resource in the city of New Orleans to initiate commercial and residential and theme type of developments in the city of New Orleans. Take it from Jack's Brewery, which may not have received a UDAC for that, but Riverwalk received a UDAC and Urban Development Action Grant. So it did a lot of revitalization in the city of New Orleans and new construction. And during those initial years of Dutch Morial, that's when you saw the high rise, the skyline actually changed during that period.
Mm-hmm. We interviewed Tony Mumfree.
Yes,
that was our last interview.
That was my boss.
Really?
Yeah. In fact, Tony was Dutch executive assistant for, I guess, economic development, I believe, and UDAC actually was a part of one of his departments. Mm-hmm. And I was the UDAC administrator, and I worked with developing UDACs for developers in the city of New Orleans, be it mostly residential or the ones that I worked on, new construction of housing, and for first-time home buyers, and also a few hospitals in that area.
Now, just in general, it seems like urban history is, in urban history, we've looked at neighborhood revitalization and federal government dollars being funneled through the city. What was, what do you feel was the most important aspect of that for the administration in terms of where dollars are being funneled?
Well, it depends on who you're looking at, who you're talking to. If you're looking at the African American community, you have to take neighborhood development revitalization, and that was very important. Not so much as the UDACs, because UDACs is really for developers, and those individuals basically had a lot of personal capital, and the banks, easily finance those multi-commercial projects for them. The neighborhood commercial revitalization also used HUD funds in order to revitalize a lot of neighborhoods in the city of New Orleans. And you had target areas, and especially on the Claiborne Avenue area, that and Dutch was determined to filter monies and into these different areas and these pockets, because they were basically torn down and areas, and they needed that for new job opportunities, to bring new businesses back to the area, also for housing, but mostly for the revitalization of small and minority businesses. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, it kind of is a twofold type of part. The monies that for economic development that went out for neighborhood revitalization was very important to small groups of people. The UDAC funds basically did a number of help with the tourism industry of New Orleans because we generated, Riverwalk came in, Canal Place was a recipient of a UDAC grant, and so many other large type of businesses like that.
Okay. Something else that's involved was New Orleans had lost its what little manufacturing base it had from the 1960s, it seems, and it was an emphasis on tourism and the port at the time. It
was an emphasis on tourism and the port, but also there was still that emphasis on developing our manufacturing area, industrial park. We had AMED, Amanaster Michoud Development District out in eastern New Orleans. It could never take off. And it just never took out the way that the city had planned through all their research and long-term planning studies that have been done. We were lucky to get a UDAC for another company, a technology company, SFE Technologies came in. That's the same building. Well, they didn't stay very long because that also kind of went down, and we ended up selling that building to McFougal's, and as you know, that building burned down, and now I believe we have Crown Crescent distributors that had recently moved into that same complex out in eastern New Orleans. But the industrial park area, trying to get businesses to move out there because, we were so close to the water, and the port was right, the water base was there, so it's good for any manufacturing company to move in the area. So we came up with, the state of Louisiana had the industrial revenue bonds. We had enterprise zone areas, targeted in that area to entice businesses to come in, but it just never really took off. So the thing for New Orleans and what happened at the same part, because you have these cyclical periods, and but we had the industrial park area going, but it was going down. At the same time industrial park was going down, economic development was going up for tourism. The World's Fair was developing, even though a lot of people say it was a flop. They didn't make it, it wasn't whatever, but it did change that entire area, that warehouse area in downtown. And as you see right now, it's a very booming place. So it was, tourism came up. With tourism coming up, the hotels did, and more businesses came to the city of New Orleans. But low paid jobs.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah, we didn't make it as for technology plants. As you know, industrial parks bring in higher salary base, and by having, I believe, 7 universities located in the city of New Orleans, I don't really know if they were targeted in the right way in order to provide that leverage and that marketing to go out there and try to get these people, these companies to come to New Orleans. But and so by not, I don't know what type of combined agreement or cooperative it was between the educational institutions in the city of New Orleans and also the business leaders in order to go out, and the state really, and to come with tax incentives and other types of financing, creative financing, to get these companies to come to New Orleans. Because with as many universities as we have in the city of New Orleans, it's a good mecca for any company to say, well, look, my training base is there. And I can pull my resources from these different people, these different groups, but it just didn't work. So tourism came up. I believe probably the next administration concentrated more on tourism, in a sense, but the pay scale was so low in that area because you're talking about minimum wages, and so that's where we are.
So, sorry, in hindsight, what would you have done to sort of attract those technology-based companies?
Well, I think I will pull together a cooperative between the educational institutions, the banks, and the other leaders in the city, and that's how you have to market to these different companies. We We had the water was there. The dock is great. You know, the first or second largest port in the country, and so that was a good revenue, a good avenue on that side of it. But I think that when people are relocating to areas, they look at your educational institutions. Okay, they look at housing, they look at your different schools, because training is very important. Okay, so having resources to pull people from for training is good, but they needed, I think it was required, and they may have done it, I don't know. Okay, but it should have been more of for lack of a better word to say, a committee of consisting of people from these different industries, from educational, business, and also on the financial side, that can go out and market to these different companies and say New Orleans is the place, you know. But what happened is that people started moving away because the base wasn't here.
In terms of the financial institutions like the banks, we talked a little bit about how in other cities like mayors like Maynard Jackson and various mayors, they kind of coerced white or mainstream institutions into funding minority-based programs or minority-based businesses, and they threatened to pull out government contracts if they didn't cooperate. So my question to you is, do you think Dutch Morial did enough to coerce financial institutions into funding minority-owned businesses?
He tried his best. And as the director of the Office of Small and Minority Business, the biggest complaint from all, I would say 98% of the African American businesses in the city of New Orleans is that financing just was not available by going into the bank. So what Dutch did, we had created what you would call Citywide Development Corporation, and using community development block grant funds, we came up with a way in order to provide short-term, low-interest loans to women and minority-owned businesses to start up capital, and that's what they needed. It was also very difficult for these companies to receive bonding. Okay, it just wasn't done. We tried to come up with so many creative ways of coming up with bonding for minority businesses, because most of your construction jobs required for you to have be bonded.
There are two types of bonds, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
performance bond.
And yeah, performance bond, and performance bond is basically more of a guarantee. You know, if you do not complete the job, that the money is there in order to help with that part of it. But it was very difficult. It was for African American businesses in the city of New Orleans. We came up in 1984. Dutch signed an executive order requiring for all city contracts to have 20% minority participation. Okay, all hell broke loose. Okay, the contractors did not want to do it. We had contractors to come forward and come up with all type of fraudulent type of minority businesses, saying that I'm a Native American, I mean Indian. Okay, I am a female, so therefore I classified as a minority business, and so on, in order just to not subcontract any of their work out to minority-owned firms. Well, granted, minority firms was looking for an opportunity. Okay, but if the banks did not finance you in order to buy the materials and the equipment you need in order to perform the job, how in the world could you do it? Okay, and so it came to the point that only a few of these on the construction side, because see, when you're looking at set-aside programs, you have construction and goods and services. Okay, and so on the construction side, that 20%, I don't think was ever met. Okay, but Dutch knew that it didn't work. So what he did, he came up with joint ventures without having to go through the regular city, without having to go through the regular city bidding process. You have another area called professional services. Okay, those are not bidded out. Okay, at the pleasure of the mayor, they're signed off on contracts, whatever, and they go to whomever. Okay, and Dutch put together a lot of different African American businesses for them to joint venture with other majority companies, and it worked. Okay, their joint venture may consist of the minority portion may have 20% of the joint venture from parking lots, for parking garages. We were never really successful in doing the hotels and those different type things, but it gave them an opportunity to get a piece of that pie that was not available to them, because the banks were not, the banks were very conservative, may I say, okay, and the monies just were not there. On the other part of it, for goods and services, the city had a set aside also. But what it was is that we had identified maybe about 15 areas that we knew we had minority businesses providing services in, okay, in the city of New Orleans. And those areas were set aside strictly for minority firms to bid on. And that did help. We we had many economic fairs, meaning minority small business fairs, in order to these companies to come out and display their goods and services, invite other companies in so they can see and take a look at it, okay? And that went on for about 5 years or more, okay?
Well, yeah, actually stepping back a little bit, I understand that the set-aside programs with goods and services had actually started through the aviation, through public transit, which was actually NOPSI at the time, and then through the airport also. And then he eventually branched out in the other areas, but it initially started with city departments. And then he moved over into, I know for sure, the Sewage and Water Board in 1981. He tried this. And then this affected private markets more so than government-run
agencies.
That's the best way of putting it.
Well, on the federal government side, you had a set-aside program. It was called the 8A program, 8A. And in order to, you had to be certified through the Small Business Administration to participate in that particular program. It's a very good program. Under the city, the Aviation Board had a set-aside program, the Sewage and Water Board had a set-aside program, RTA had a set-aside program, and the City of New Orleans. But in all these different agencies, there were, all of them had their own application they had their own certification process. And what we tried to do as a group, and we all met, is to come up with one certification. If you're certified with the City of New Orleans, you automatically certified at RTA, Sewage and Water Board, and Aviation Board, okay, trying to work those different areas out together. And it was, it was tough initially, because in other cities, it was working. And I had lived in D.C., and it worked in D.C. I lived in Dover, Delaware, and it worked in Dover, Delaware. So I moved to New Orleans. New Orleans was way behind time. I mean, they were...
Yeah, and actually the goals were higher, I understand, in D.C.
Oh, yeah, it was 45%. Yeah, it was very high. They had what they call the M.B.A, Minority Business Opportunity Commission. And the commission had a very good set-aside program, and it worked. And but what happened, a number of businesses out in the D.C., Maryland area was the federal government 8A program. And the 8A program is still around today. It's a very good program and it's not a program where a company actually stay on it for years. It's that you have a goal, okay? The purpose of the 8A program is to you leverage out of the program. Because at the time you're leveraging out of the 8A program, you should be able to pick up more business in the private sector.
Because that's the actual goal.
Yeah, exactly. That's the goal. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. My friend, I'm looking at something in my master's. I'm looking at the Sewage and Water Board. Their resistance to the set-aside program, and their argument was that they were not a government. They were not a city agency. They were not a city department. They were a state-created board. And there's arguments back and forth whether or not the mayor, as president of the board, had authority.
Could require them to set aside contracts for minority businesses. Yeah, I think that was a concern, but they had a representative. I know because when I worked for the city, I know it was the person I dealt with, and they do have it now because I know the person that's over the program. But for set aside programs. But you have to remember also is that you didn't have a whole lot of minority businesses out there in the city. You had them, but they were mostly mom and pop type of operations. Okay, so technical assistance had to come in. You know, how do you develop these companies into viable businesses? Okay, teach them about the bidding process, to teach them how to do a business plan and how to market their companies. Okay, and so these services had to be developed also at the same time, because you just can't tell a person to go out there and say, okay, you go and try to get this $1 million contract and you don't have any experience in doing it. So you know, Small Business Administration had workshops. The City of New Orleans had workshop. You know, how to go into business, how to start your business, how to keep your business. You know, and retain your customers.
So what was the what would you say was the primary impediment or roadblock into as far as developing minority businesses into something further than the mom and pop stores like you just mentioned? What was the major roadblock? What was standing in between them being major companies and being mom and pop industry?
Well, I guess it's the same thing that may stand between companies even today. It is the really, first of all, it's the commitment. Okay, you can't go into business because you lost your job. Okay, and so it's a commitment to the business that you're getting ready to go into, first of all, and realizing that it takes time in order to move it. So it's a 24-hour process, you know, to make a business a thriving business. But what we were facing in the city is that everyone wanted a contract, but they didn't know how to go about getting the contract. Okay, so it was just the basic technical assistance that was missing. And most people were intimidated when they were asked to do a business plan. Well, what do you mean do a business plan, and what kind of financial? I don't have any financial statements. You know, I don't have any money. So how can I go to the bank? I go to the bank, they want everything that I own. But that's banking. And it was an area that I found out very strangely in the city of New Orleans that a lot of companies just did not have the knowledge of going to walking into a bank and applying for a loan and whatever. Now some banks now had programs set up in order to help these small businesses, you know, to develop. I'll tell you the name of it later. I think they still do have it, okay? But the major problem was that they just didn't know how to approach banks. They didn't know how to market their services because we're so used to, and I'm looking at the smaller businesses, okay? I'm looking at the smaller ones, okay? And they didn't know how to market, okay? And that was the main thing. Yeah.
Okay, during the Landry administration, there was a influx of federal funds, like we talked about earlier, and a lot of federal monies. But when Morial came in, a lot of those federal monies sort of dwindled or became sparse during the time of Reaganomics and the conservative swing in the federal government. So my question to you is, how did you guys sort of navigate around that issue and still be able to create business opportunities for minorities?
It comes from the top, and it came from Dutch. He was being the first black mayor. He opened up so many doors for African Americans that we didn't realize the doors were there. Okay, and by being appointed to boards and commissions, you knew exactly what was going on in the city. Through public hearings was done, and minorities being on the dock board and opportunities that came about. So it just wasn't a known fact that opportunities existed. And then once they found out these opportunities were out there, then more people started taking advantage of it. But as I said before, they didn't know how to go about to take the first step, okay? And so therefore we created many one-stop business offices for people to come in to learn how do you get your occupational license, how do you get your license for this, what do you do about taxes. It was the entire process of training a company and showing them the direction for them to go in order to maintain some type of stability to their company.
You mentioned that it was a top-down effort, that he actually recognized that it was something about his vision for the city. And you mentioned earlier the sort of centralization and a standard that all minority businesses could apply.
Yes, so certification.
Certification. Could you speak for a moment about the vision that Dutch Morial had for the city, and for it's just quite simply, could you speak about his vision for the city as you knew it, as you saw it?
Well, I guess I can speak on the vision which I saw in dealing with economic development. And Dutch was creating a roadway, a clear path for more companies to come into the city of New Orleans, and for the population to everyone to benefit from what's out there. There was a lot of resistance in what Dutch was doing, okay, because the majority population, did not, when I say, I would say white businessmen, were not used to dealing with African Americans, okay? And Dutch opened those doors. It was more of a lot of people say he was rough and whatever, but I don't look at it like that, because he had to open doors for people, and it was a lot of resistance. And you know, people are naturally resistant to change, okay? And so when you feel as though you're being forced, or someone forcing people upon you, you put up a roadblock, okay? And you say no. So it was a steady bickering between the business community and Dutch Morial for them to open these doors up, open up opportunities for everyone. And not only for it was only for African Americans, but you know, we had the Hispanic population here in the city of New Orleans, and a large Hispanic population. And you know, we met quite often, and opportunities had to be opened up for Hispanic population, also for women. So I saw what Dutch wanted to do. And I was just really shocked when I also noticed a sudden stop to what he wanted to do. At one time in, I would say, the early 80s, you will go on Partridge Street and all you see are cranes, okay, buildings coming up around there. And suddenly these type things stopped. I guess the oil industry bust, you know, they started moving out. The different types of creative financing was not really coming to the city. Our next administration concentrated more on tourism rather than economic development. All right, so it was just a big change in everything that he tried to do for the city, of New Orleans.
Now, you mentioned the Hispanic community. Did you work with the Vietnamese community?
No, the Vietnamese, no, not at all. In fact, it was really, in the early 80s, it was just not really prevalent. It was, you know, you didn't see anything about the Vietnamese community. But the most active community was the Hispanic community. And they had a nice organization, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and so forth. And so that was it's still today, it's a very large community in New Orleans.
Now, coming from outside of New Orleans, what was your initial impression about you mentioned that it was behind the times in comparison to other cities, but what was your initial impression about the relationship between the mayor's office and the business community? Not a black and white thing, but just the structure of city government vis-a-vis economic leaders.
It wasn't about my initial feelings about the city of New Orleans, that it wasn't about business. People were very laid back. Now, that's anyone's impression when they come to New Orleans. They think everyone is very laid back. And so laid back and kind of nonchalant in a way, take business a little bit on the easy side, because you have your business and you play, okay, in the city. and you asked my initial feelings between Dutch and the business community. I think that it was a. I don't think it was a smooth transaction between. I don't think it was anything smooth. Uh, the business community wasn't readily didn't come to the city Dutch Morial with open arms. Said, Dutch, we accept what you're trying to do, and let's work together. Okay, it wasn't like that. It was more of, this is what we have to do in order for this city to continue to grow. Okay, we have a high illiteracy rate in the city of New Orleans. Okay, we don't have a good base for people that are trained to come in and work in these different companies and whatever. But these are citizens here, and we need to provide opportunities for them. Okay, I kind of think that if Dutch had gotten his plan out the way he wanted to, that this city wouldn't be infiltrated so much crime today. Okay, and it's it's so much crime because you have a very high illiteracy rate in the city of New Orleans, and in the city. But Dutch started off on what Dutch was the first mayor to initiate clean city. Okay, he had a clean city department because it was a trashy, dirty city. Okay, and for people to pick up litter, and to work with the business community on that. And so those small things like that worked. But when it came time for to have a what are we going to do to keep Exxon here? What are we going to do to bring all these other companies in? That started later on, outside of Dutch Morial's administration. But they had Metropolitan Area Leadership Committee, all these other type things organizations had formed, and that was their main goal and purpose. Okay, and so from there.
Now, just comparing New Orleans, I know that you said D.C. and their higher goals for minority and women-owned business participation.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see the same sort of recalcitrance?
Oh, no.
Other?
Here in the city?
No, actually, other cities.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. But in Detroit, in Baltimore, Maryland, in Los Angeles, Kansas City, New Orleans was the only city, and I swear, because I actually traveled to many cities to explain a federal government public law 95-507, which is almost like a new public law that had been established for set-aside programs. But when I moved to New Orleans, and especially when I was appointed to Director of Small and Minority Business, we had black businesses in this city that was resistant to the 8A program. They would tell me, I don't want a federal government program. I'm not going to. I said, no, it's not a giveaway program. You have to have a viable, good business just to be certified. But they were so far behind time. And it's hard to, and I don't know, it was hard to understand how people did not know or whether these businesses were there waiting to be, and I hate to say that, especially on camera, but I don't know if these businesses were there waiting to be given something, or I couldn't understand it. It wasn't until later, probably in 86 or so, that more companies started looking at the 8A program. And I think maybe in the 90s now you may have more firms looking at it, okay? Mm-hmm. But I think companies here, businesses in New Orleans was very slow, very behind time as far as minority set-aside programs. We actually bought in a company, the National Conference of Mayors. We contracted out to them to bring in a company in order to help develop our minority business program in the city of New Orleans. We had a terrible program, okay? Even within City Hall, even though Dutch wanted to have set-aside programs, you had departments in the city that was very resistant to even thinking about doing work with minority businesses.
Was it overt racism? What was it? What made companies, even city departments, so resistant to this? Was it a lack of training? What excuses were used?
What excuses was used? They didn't want to do it. They just didn't want to contract work out to minority businesses. It's just simple as that. They just did not want to do it. I mean, even I had to, when I was over that department, I had to bring respect to that department because I was going to be respected, okay? And I remember going to staff meetings and everyone had to give a report. And I remember one time all the other department heads gave a report and my name was never called for me to give my report, Never called. Everyone else from all the department. And so they make you feel so well what I'm doing is just, irrelevant. But I made it work, okay? I took it out on the street. I took the program out and developed small business workshops and conferences and trade shows and I did it, okay? And Dutch was right there, okay? And that's I made it more noticeable. When Dutch signed in 1984, when he signed the set-aside program, it's one I had worked on when I was in D.C., okay? And I took the same language, brought it to I had my friend to send it down to them. They didn't have fax. If they have faxes, just mail it to me, okay? Okay, mail me information. I rewrote it and everything, sent it to the city attorney for them to go over all the language and all that, send it on to Dutch for Dutch to look at it, and he put a big stamp on it called draft, and eventually it went into law.
Now this was moving from goods and services to contracts.
It moved from goods it was in three areas. It was in professional service contracts, it was construction and goods and services.
So this in 84.
In 84.
A more inclusive.
Yeah, exactly. In 1984. But
was Liberty Bank a factor in that? It was the only minority-owned bank?
we had about 3 minority banks during that time. We have one, United Federal, I believe is the name of it. It's on Canal Street now. Liberty Bank, and they had a new one called Regions or something else, okay? But Liberty, I believe, was one of the largest ones, okay? But I don't know of any businesses that actually went to Liberty for loans or anything, for small business loans. We created that program within the city of New Orleans, a small business loan program. And then, of course, when Riverwalk came with the Rouge development, and Rouge was very proactive in minority participation. Even at the convention center, had a good minority set-aside program. And then when the World's Fair came through, had a very good minority set-aside program. So all these programs, it was working.
Now, you talked about the financing for minority businesses that the city created through the small...
Yeah, through Citywide Development Corporation.
Citywide Development Corporation. So it acted as a financing entity rather than directing...
Yeah, and it wasn't really a city agency, okay? It's a quasi-city agency, but they did receive monies from CDBG funds, okay? Community Development Block Grant funds. And because those funds could be channeled in to assist in developing neighborhoods and developing businesses, okay? And also the monies had to be paid back, with the interest and everything. So that also helped generate more income to be loaned out to minority and women-owned businesses. So it was a very good program.
That brings up something about women-owned businesses. What was the general feeling then, of getting women involved in the economic mainstream?
I thought it was very good. It was very good to have women involved with the economic mainstream of the city of New Orleans. And we had the University of New Orleans, one of the premier places for women business programs over here. And in fact, I think it was one of the only ones at the time that you can come to the University of New Orleans for information on that program. And I think they still have it today. And later on, the city, they developed another W.B.A. program in the city to help women with training who want to work in the construction industry, okay? And these women were trained as drivers of trucks, drivers for forklifts, lifts and all that, okay? And that program worked. So yeah.
Okay. How many people were in your staff?
Well, initially, to tell you how they felt about minority business in the city of New Orleans, it was only me. And because it wasn't a priority, they didn't care. It just wasn't. It wasn't. I have this guy that one of these guys. He had this joke he used to tell. It's that when he first came to my office, Dutch said, "Go up there and see Nick Harris in minority business." So he walked around, looked for me, and then he looked under the stairs and he saw my office under these stairs. And but actually, it was Marlon Gossman. Marlon was the director of minority business prior to. In fact, when Marlon had, they call it minority business office. Okay, and when Marlon left, I was doing UDAC. So Marlon left to go to property management. Dutch appointed me to head up that office. Okay, and I had experience because I have done minority business all my life in D.C. and Delaware. So we changed the name to Office of Small Minority and Women Business Development to make it more inclusive of everyone. By making it more inclusive of everyone, you was able to get a little bit more majority companies participating with you. Okay, by calling strictly minority business, the first thing a person see, a large company see, oh well, these just a group of black businesses trying to do something. No, we may not support them, okay? And so I changed the name to Small Minority and Women-Owned Businesses, okay? And that way, you wouldn't believe the change it brought about, okay? It was only a marketing tool, all right? But to make everyone feel more inclusive, okay? And then the larger companies start supporting us more, okay? Because that's the way it was out there, small minority and women-owned businesses. And because all these companies needed help. Not only the minority business, but you had a lot of small businesses out there too was struggling to make it, okay? And no one was addressing their needs. So if you're a city agency, you have to have, you for the city, so you can't strictly be for minority-owned businesses. You have to serve them all, every business out there. Okay, so and that's what we did. We opened the doors, and I enlarged my staff to 3 people. I had 4 people altogether, which I'm including that 4, and we became a very viable business.
So in the end, how do you rate the job that the administration did in terms of developing small business and minority business?
I think the administration did a fine job, but we just never, in my opinion, when you talk about contractual opportunities, it was good on the professional service side. But as far as goods and services within the city, because later on let's say it like this. You had 10 items set aside for minorities to bid on. Right there in itself, that is just, that's terrible. Okay, because you're saying that only minorities can bid on these 10 areas. Okay, but you had to start somewhere. We knew we had minorities in paper products. We knew we had them in janitorial service. We knew we had them in all these other little areas like that, just to get them started. But with the city of New Orleans, and the other side is almost like if I tried to bid on something over here in this other area, I would not even be considered. Okay, but it was a bidding process. Okay, you had to bid, and a lot of these companies did not bid. Did not know how to bid.
So that brings another question.
Mm-hmm.
The public bidding laws.
Mm-hmm.
Because that was always a little
Mm-hmm.
hurdle, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
If an agency or entity needed goods and services, then or construction, it had to, if it fell within those areas in which minority business, then that had to be bidded on by minority business. To me, that's really breaking every public bid law that it is. I don't even think that would ever stood up in court. Okay. Yeah.
Oh no.
Actually, under Richmond, Croson.
Yeah, Croson. In Richmond, Virginia. Mm-hmm.
Right. It actually it became disadvantaged.
Yeah.
Businesses
Yeah.
rather than the set aside program.
Well, it had always been called disadvantaged businesses. Okay. In fact, the federal government name was the Office of Minority Business Enterprise, and then it changed to Office of Small and Minority, Office of SBD as Disadvantaged Businesses, WBS. Well, I forgot the name. Okay, one of those. Okay, and that was run through the Department of Commerce, and the office was located within that department. You know, with that as with SBA is totally separate, but you had to show that you were economically disadvantaged in order to qualify for these opportunities that were set aside, and that was a mess. Okay, because you had people coming up with some of everything and saying that they were economically disadvantaged, and to go back in the history to show that when my dad was an Indian and my last name was Cherokee, and you just came up with anything. It just was not and it just was not good. But I frankly, and you asked how we base how rate the whole program. I think it opened doors for a number of people, and it educated people in the city of New Orleans because they didn't know what opportunities were out there. It educated a lot of businesses in New Orleans because they didn't know how to start a business, and it made them more aware of their surroundings, and it today a lot of these businesses that I worked with years ago, they're still in business, okay, and they just learn how to do it, okay, to go out there and market and get the business. And a lot of them are not on any type of set-aside programs. They're going on their own, and which is good, okay, and that's how you have to do it.
Yeah, that's pretty much the point.
Yeah. Yeah, make them independent. That's the whole point of a set-aside program. It's not a crutch. It's not for someone to stay on forever. Okay, a set-aside program, in my opinion, should be an opportunity for any small business to get their foot through the door and to learn all the techniques and technical assistance, everything is needed in order for them to compete competitively with their counterparts. Okay?
It's a means to an end.
Yeah, and that's the purpose of any set-aside program.
Who do you think benefited most from this along a class spectrum in the minority community? Who would have the resources to start the business? Would it fall into the black middle class? The lower middle class blacks? The urban underclass, so to speak? Who would have benefited from this?
From the set-aside programs?
Set-aside program.
I think when you divide the social classes up in those categories, different categories, if we had to name 3 categories within any particular social categories, I think that in total, all benefited from it. Okay, meaning when you have your lower, middle, and upper classes, okay, the lower class economic group benefited because in their neighborhoods they had opportunities to go to different venues, okay, in order to purchase, okay, goods and services, whatever, something reasonably priced for them. The opportunities were there for them to do that, and also provided maybe small jobs for people in their areas, okay. For the middle class, gave them an opportunity also because you have a lot of bricklayers and other people in the construction industry was able to get small jobs on that, based on these different areas. Whereas they have been maybe working for both brothers for 15 years. In some cases, some of these guys were able to branch out and start their own business, okay, and come back to a Bow Brothers and some other company out there to do some small subcontracting work.
Joint ventures.
For the upper middle class, they were able to have the type of capital and collateral to go out to the banks in order to get the money in order to do joint ventures to put in what percentages they needed. Okay, they were the people that was appointed to the boards and the commissions of the city of New Orleans that actually spread the word to everyone that these opportunities exist. Okay, so I think they all benefited from it.
That's a good answer.
Yeah. Mm.
So George, do you have anything?
Just one last question. What do you think Morial saw the minority business community, say 10 or 20 years down the line?
Well, I think he.
What do you think he saw the minority business community as far as where it was headed?
I think that Dutch saw opportunities for people that before did not envision these different opportunities out there. He saw because he was directly involved with it every day. And, money just don't fall out the sky. And so, and it definitely doesn't fall on this side of the street and not on this side. Okay? So Dutch knew was falling like this. Okay? But it depends on how this group was going to get a piece on their side. And so what he was trying to create, where when that money did fall and these opportunities fell, that it didn't go to only one side, but it went to both sides. Okay? And I think that's what he was trying to do. And I think we worked on it. It didn't fill the entire neighborhood, but a portion of it. And so that's the only way I can envision
And
what
it made possible those future changes like we see today.
it made possible. Those changes he laid the groundwork for it. He laid the foundation for what we partially see today, and from there, yeah.
Fair enough.
Mm.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
Thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
brother.
you partially see today. I mean, everything's coming out right now with his son's administration and Mark's administration and RTA, Aviation Board, and these programs that have come up. And it's just kind of funny the charges that are being made right now in terms of his father trying to set up a system or an avenue to make change.
Mhm.
And now what you see in the press, what's thrown about, is that Mark, a son of privilege, comes along and has allowed friends and people to step in and make much more money off of it, and somehow the money's getting diverted.
Mhm.
It's interesting.
Mhm.
Let's see how it's going to turn out.
I don't know how it's going to turn out, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. I like Mark, and Mark had so many people in the community were so disconcerted with Mark, okay, and because they saw that what they could see was his friends gaining all the different opportunities out there. And for some reason, with all this political patronage and articles coming out and people knowing for sure that if I give to your political campaign, then I'm almost assured some type of contractual opportunity. And so when you get a number of people talking about that, you can believe there is some validity to it, okay? But it doesn't only just happen with in Mark Morial's administration. It's been happening in every administration. And it just so happened that it was, escalated a whole lot, embellished a whole lot within Mark's administration because the people that were the recipients of these, they were in the news constantly. Okay, and the media picked up on it, okay, and so the media can pick up on anything and turn it into something that's completely awful. And at the same time, Mark may have been these guys who had businesses. It's not like they didn't have a business and provided an opportunity. You know, they had a business, but you know, on the other side, you have companies that do not have businesses and they're receiving just as much. Okay, and it's all about how the news media basically portray these different, you know, everything that's really going on. Okay, so Mark's way of doing business was totally different from his father. His father was setting the groundwork for it. Okay, it was nothing out there for us to do. So, but later on in the years to come, the world has changed completely. Minority businesses were acceptable, you know.
The face of the city has changed.
The face of the city, yeah. Well, the face of the city changed a whole lot. Okay, we had white flight in the city of New Orleans, and people were leaving out, and that's why I go back to the education system and the higher education system. I'm not talking about the parochial these high schools and elementary schools, but I think that something need to be done, should have. Consistently, on a consistent basis with the educational institutions here in the city of New Orleans. We have 7 of them located within I bet you anything, all of us can walk to each one of these universities. You know, they can do a run. The Crescent City West can run from every university here, okay? I mean, we're that close together. And, but they play a very important role in the make in New Orleans. But it just wasn't, you know, it's something wasn't done. But anyways, Dutch Mark's situation, I don't know what to say about that. I hope everything fared out well and with it. And but what Mark is not his father, nor was he trying to be. He's his own man, and Dutch Morial entire mission was a little bit different. Okay, he was a creator, and that's what he did. So.
That's interesting.
It is.
Well, it brings into question everything about the civil rights movement and the goals. And there's no doubt Dutch was a participant in this and a leader in the local civil rights movement. As you know, in a sense, some people have called him a walking civil rights revolution. First black legislature in the modern era in Louisiana. Assistant U.S. attorney. So many things he racked up. So many firsts. So, you know, it becomes this question, what were the goals in the larger civil rights movement, and how he tried to orient that in a local context? You know, was it integration?
I think that it was more developing opportunities for people. We black folk it just wasn't there. You know, the doors were closed. You just couldn't. And but it's no. See. What I understand about race relations is it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not your fault, it's not my fault, okay? But if we continue to persist and carry those feelings around, then it becomes your fault and our fault, okay? But it was the time of, it was just the times that we were living in, that opportunities were not really available, and they just were not there, okay? But when the doors opened and you saw, when Dutch came through and showed the white community, said, well, this is a good black business here. This guy can do this type of work, whatever. That man may have never before in his life seen a black businessman, okay? May have never even walked or talked to anyone, so his only impression was what he may have seen on TV or read, okay? And so when these doors opened and Dutch brought these people to the table, and they sat on this side and they started talking, and they realized that okay, well, that makes sense, and we can do that. I like the way he's dealing in business. I know I'm not taking a high risk with him if I, spend some money on his business, but I'm going to set someone over here to watch him very closely and guide him through this whole process, because if he loses, then we lose, and so on. I want him to be successful, okay? So Dutch was able to bring a group of people to the table. Okay, he opened up those doors for him, and that's when after Dutch became all the first, and because they never dealt with a second, okay, and after that, so someone had to be first, and fortunately he was the first one in many areas, and then he was the type person that he didn't leave them back there, he brought them along. Okay, well look, there are some more of us out there. Let me show you what they're about. Okay. And it happened. He brought them up front. Mark came along a little bit differently. Okay, he brought along because it had been set. Okay, everything is set. He didn't have to ride on the back of the bus, or he didn't have to do this. He went to all the good schools and all that, so he didn't see any difference between anything. Okay, but the opportunities, the economic part wasn't still there. So how do I get my other friends, the other people, to get part of it? So he brought some of them along, okay? They went about it a little bit differently. He brought his friends along, okay, whatever. So, but it was a whole other group of people out there who were still waiting, okay, because they wanted an opportunity also to attract businesses to the area. I'll tell you something. The black community gets nothing when it comes to carnival and those different areas like that, because carnival is in the CBD. Okay, let's say like this: businesses outside the CBD, not only black businesses, they don't receive the benefits from carnival if a parade doesn't pass by, or you don't have uptown, like these other places. Okay, so you have to create opportunities, to bring people out. This administration here should be concentrated more on eastern New Orleans, further out. Okay.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask. So using like government funding and city government,
yeah,
to bring black businesses to the table, to have a dialogue opening. By doing that, it seemed to circumvent black businesses from just remaining in, say, New Orleans East or in other isolated parts of the city. Mm-hmm. It actually created opportunities.
Yeah.
And he did it through it seems to me.
He had
through
to.
Government.
He did. That's the only way. Because the private sector wasn't there.
Yeah.
The private sector was going in a different direction. Okay? The private sector wasn't even investing in New Orleans. Mm-hmm. The banks were investing in New Orleans. Most of these different developers you see here had to go to Houston and other places to invest in a business here in the city of New Orleans.
And the Superdome was a good example of that.
Yeah.
A lot of outside investors in the city itself.
Yeah.
The Greater New Orleans
Bridge
was also something
yeah.
a lot of resistance.
We have a very, very conservative banking community. We had one. They didn't invest here in the city of New Orleans. Okay, so Dutch tried to change that. I mean, one time we had a big meeting of all the bankers, okay, to tell them about, small businesses. Invest in these companies. This is our future for the city of New Orleans.
What about like a client-patron relationship or paternalism? Mm-hmm. How did you, as a minority business counselor, how did you deal with that, or how did Dutch Morial deal with that sort of white paternalism when it comes to business negotiations?
How did we deal with it? I don't know. I can't. I don't know how we dealt with it. You were so used to some banks being so condescending, and just not totally ignoring you, but not showing a great level of interest, okay, that you had to turn elsewhere, okay, for services. Banks weren't willing to open their doors easily for you to come in to get this type of financing and to help, if so many small businesses complain that they just had to give up everything they actually own when they walk into the bank, because they want to collect, they want the mortgage, they wanted this, they wanted that, they wanted everything. Okay, and you know, in the real world, that really wasn't how it was. I mean, it was like that for these small minority businesses, but the other average person didn't have to give up everything. Okay,
Yeah.
so but in walking and dealing with these different institutions, that's why we had to go through the different federal funding sources in order to help these companies. You know,
The citywide development.
Citywide Development Corporation, Neighborhood Commercial Revitalization provided $25,000 loans to businesses to help them to revitalize in their own area. Okay, and so you know, we had a lot of different programs like that in the city. Okay.
Makes sense.
Hmm.
Well, I think we've taken quite a bit of your time here.
Okay.
Um,
Well, thank
we
you.
can call it a day, and once we go with the transcripts,
Yeah.
there are certainly things that I flubbed and
Yeah.
questions that I would have liked to have asked.
Yeah.
Maybe at some point I can
Okay. Okay.
talk to you more about that.
All right. Thank you.